is almost 4.5 years since the last time we were here, and this is the most important community to us because it's where we started.
Like many communities across the Western Cape and South Africa, we struggle with diabetes, cancers, high blood pressure, all the things that are lifestyle diseases.
I have a genetic disposition to diabetes and heart disease, and I know that I have been struggling with weight all my life.
I've got rheumatoid arthritis, and mostly in my right knee is like I need to get an operation, but it never happened because of my weight. I have arthritis, and last year, August, I weighed 107.
They're all facing the same challenges. Doctors, they don't usually support them, and they don't give any nutritional advice.
My background personally is from tertiary medicine in the public health sector, where I just saw my patients getting sicker and sicker and dying earlier, and I reached out to POF to say that we needed to do something in the poorer communities.
So in 2015, we started and had the first Eat Better South Africa intervention here, and the results were so astounding. And since then, we've self-funded 12 programs, and this is our 13th. And it's such an important number because it's the first program that we've done that's been assessed by a university in an ethics-approved study.
We've sort of set up a collaboration with EBSA to evaluate it scientifically, and we did a whole bunch of health tests before the intervention.
We did blood tests, body measurements.
So this morning we're seeing 34 women that have completed this women's only intervention, some of whom had severe hypertension, previous histories of heart disease and diabetes, and the results are astounding.
Was just to come under 100, and I've achieved that. It has changed my whole mindset and especially my health. When I started this program, I went to go walk on Komichi Beach, and that was my first walk on the beach.
The low-carb, high-fat lifestyle, I know that it works. Besides losing the weight health-wise, the energy levels are off the charts.
Journey has been so great with Eat Better South Africa, helping me change my lifestyle.
It was amazing to see the work done by Eat Better South Africa with women who have changed their lives. To know that actually this is where the science is going. This is where the real truth around nutrition is actually being shown.
People have no clue what the processed foods do to them and how that contributes to the lifestyle diseases. They were fisher village people that ate a lot of fish and had a little backyard where they grew their vegetables in 50, 60, 70 years ago and was in optimum health.
When I explained to them how our forefathers eat, it made sense to them, it made sense to me as well.
We're doing this for 6 weeks, an intensive educational intervention, and this is happening in a community with limited resources. And it is wonderful to see people adapt this diet to their lifestyles and to make it something that they are able to do for years and years.
It's not always about the weight loss. It helps them, their blood sugar levels came down, and I can see that they started having the energy.
Diabetes is a really expensive disease, and then obviously the complications that go with it. You know, if you can stop that from happening, we're going to make a massive impact on this community and the economy.
Not only have people lost weight, but people are coming off their medication. For us, this is the most important thing. It is infinitely possible to regain your health by eating whole food.
It's wonderful to see some of the women that was in the original program still keeping the weight down, still healthy.
Eat Better South Africa, continue doing the good work that you're doing.
There's enough evidence to see that it's helping, especially in the poorer communities.
They have stood up and they said, no, I'm taking my health back into my own hands, and I wish the whole world could see what they've done.
I'm so proud of EBSA. I mean, it took so long for us to get this study ethically approved, and it was worth every minute of it.
I'm the least important person in this room. If we had the right money, we would convert the whole population into this, and that's our problem. What an amazing day it has been. It was really very, very exciting. The level of the conversation and the talks were astonishing. And more sense was spoken today than I normally hear when I go to medical conferences. This is real medicine. This is where we're making a difference. And it's so exciting to be part of it. This is where we can change the eating behaviors of all South Africans.
Ocean View for us is ground zero. This is where it starts. And we just see this amazing program growing from Ocean View to the next community and ultimately changing the health of the whole of South Africa.
Eat Better South Africa relies on funding and it also relies on private donations. We plan to run a whole series of them next year and we need your support. So please be involved in any way that you can.
Looks like I've got audio from all of you. Welcome. For those of you who don't know, we've got Dr. Hasina Kaji, Yana Retief, Jane Bullen, and Georgina. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that surname. You can tell us how to do it later, Georgina. But they're all from the Eat Better South Africa Foundation, which is kind of, you can correct me, Jane, but is it part of the Noakes Foundation or is it separate, like a nutrition?
It's so it's part of the Noakes Foundation.
It is part of the Noakes Foundation.
Got a separate mandate. Yes, but it's a sort of separate
I got
project.
to turn
very, very specific.
Okay, carry on.
So it was founded by the Noakes Foundation, but what we realized quite quickly was it had a very separate mandate. So it's kind of a separate entity entirely now. We work very, very clearly in underserved communities. So it works in a different focus area to the Noakes Foundation at large.
Okay. I don't know what you guys were hoping, but I tell you what I'm hoping to get out of this is maybe an explanation of how you implemented these things and eventually get on. That's why I've got Dr. Tony Hampton on here, because I don't know if you heard me that when I first introduced him was that he's the first African American speaker that we've ever had on, and I've been trying to understand why we've got no African American attendees at our events. And one of the reasons that came to light was that we didn't have any speakers like him. But as we've discussed, he's the only one I've come across so far. They just aren't out there, at least not that I've come across. And so there's a huge need in this country as well for the same thing that you're doing with your impoverished communities in South Africa. And so, I don't know, maybe we can find a way to work together. We can learn from you and do it here. But and I was just realizing that it can be, we've got the guidelines committee and we've got the advocacy committee. Now, I think this is going to be the third committee, is the one that's going to, under this SMHP, that's going to address or come up with these projects that we can maybe do and copy you guys, because what you've done there is just incredible. So I'm going to stop talking and maybe you guys can explain how it all worked and how what you learned from it, and then we can take the conversation further.
Thanks so much, Doug. So I think we've got a little agenda together where I'm scheduled to give an introduction. Are we going to run through that? Yes. Jana's been very, very organized with the way that she's structured it, or would you prefer to kind of just chat?
I'm happy. Just that we don't want to run too long, so if we can do it in 20 minutes or so, that would be good.
Okay, so I'm going to start by just introducing the work that we've done and where it came from. this started, as you saw in our video, we began this work in 2015. And it was very much, the Noakes Foundation had been created by Professor Tim Noakes as a way of giving back. So he had been working in the exercise science industry his entire life, and he hadn't really intended, he was meant to be retiring, he was an emeritus professor at the University of Cape Town, and then he had been struck by type 2 diabetes, and he reversed it. He went rogue, took himself off onto this diet, triggered by some books he read, and reversed his type 2 diabetes. And he then decided that he was going to donate all of the royalties from all of the books and work that he's done until now to this cause and to the science of reversing type 2 diabetes. So the Noakes Foundation began. I was the first person that worked there and ran the foundation from the start. And very quickly, in the first week of my role in the Noakes Foundation, I met with Dr. Hasina Kaji and another partner, Eodia Sampson, who now is a partner on the Eat Better program as well to some extent. And the three of us shared our vision for how we had to take the knowledge of low carbohydrate eating to the poorest people in South Africa. So obviously it's difficult to explain the poverty that exists in South Africa and the kinds of diets that people eat when they're poor in a country like South Africa. But if you see a typical plate, and Doug, you know the story, basically what we see is that in particular women and the poorest people in our country, and particularly poor women, eat refined carbohydrates. That's basically all they eat. So they eat something called millipap, which is a maize-based porridge, very highly refined, and they eat white bread, as well as sugars and things like that. That is the bulk of their diet. They give their children little bits of meat and vegetables that are good quality. The men tend to get a little bit more of the protein in the meals, and they feed up to 11 people. So the women that you saw in this video typically live on around an income of around $300 a month if they're employed, and they eat they live on food that's to the value of between $1 and $3 a day, just to give you a bit of context. So these are people that are very, very poor and that have suffered dramatically and been the worst affected by the terrible diets and processed foods that they live on. So that means in our country in particular, we don't have sufficient state health care for everyone. So it pretty much means that you may not be diagnosed of diabetes necessarily. You may die of a secondary condition, and you're not going to be treated well. If you are diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic in South Africa and you rely on state health care, you pop in every 3 months and you have a blood glucose test. And that's usually the only time you know what your glucose levels are, is once every 3 months. And you have your blood pressure done at the same time by an educator. So we were committed to changing that by taking a series of pilots of women that came from these communities through a low carbohydrate intervention. And we did that over a period of 5 years. We've run 14 of these pilots. The last pilot Georgina's going to talk to you about today was run through an ethics group study at the University of Cape Town. And what we found is that it worked. We weren't sure if it was actually possible that these guys would be able to commit to an LCHF diet, stick to it, and actually really implement the change, because it's so difficult for them to do that. And the results have been overwhelmingly astounding. So I'm going to hand over to the team. Of course, we've grown since then, and we now have our amazing Dr. Hasina Kaji, who's our medical director on the program. We have Yana Retief, who's the program manager who runs the program. Georgina, who's joined us today, is our PhD student that ran the study through the University of Cape Town, and they're the ones that are going to talk over what we've done. So, Yana, you're up first, I believe, and you're going to share with us Georgina, sorry, you're going to talk to us about the research results of your study.
Okay, so the idea of the study started in actually 2017 when I joined the Noakes Foundation. And basically, we were aware that there was no study that investigated the perceptions and of participants taking part in a nutrition and education program promoting low-carb, high-fat diets in South African communities. So then we designed the project, and we actually presented it at the low-carb conference in San Diego in 2018. And basically, it started in 2018 with a qualitative study. We interviewed women that took part of the program of the EPSA program since 2015. And then we interviewed women who potentially would participate in this type of programs. The aim of this study was basically to optimize the design of the EPSA program to better address women's needs. So last year we designed the mixed method cross-sectional study. We recruited the 32 women that you've just seen in the video in Ocean View, and we tested them before and after the program, and then we did a follow-up after 6 weeks. So basically the test that we run, we draw bloods and we measure different health markers. We measure weight and weight circumference. We did a diet assessment. We did food frequency, 24 hours food recall. And then we run different questionnaires, basically the WHO stepwise and some regarding food insecurities. We also gave them Actigraph, which is an activity monitor that they had to wear on their hips for a period of 8 days before and after the intervention to see if actually EPSA program was influencing also their physical activity. So we did that during the whole, we actually started 1 year ago, on the 31st of August. The EPSA program started last year on the 31st of August. And also we conducted some focus group discussions after the program to understand and to explore women's experience. And we conducted the last ones early this year on January to see if the program was sustainable. We found amazing results. Actually, all of the health markers improved, especially blood pressure, which drops around, the systolic blood pressure drops 12 points and the diastolic 7 points. This was one of the highest difference. Also, waist circumference in a period of only 2 months, they lost around 8.5 centimeters on average, which was amazing. And from the qualitative part of the study, we found that women were extremely happy with the program and they valued a lot the support that they got from EPSA. Some of them were very surprised and happy about the fact that they were not the only ones struggling with the challenges that they were struggling. By going to these educational sessions, they were able to talk about their health challenges, and they could share those challenges and also realize that other women from the same communities were facing the same challenges. One of the challenges that they mentioned so often was that they didn't get support from their health practitioners. And this brought us to design another study, which is actually the last study of my PhD and that we run early this year. And it's another qualitative study to explore the health practitioners' perceptions from these communities about low-carb, high-fat diets and the EPSA program. So interview 16 health practitioners, and we were so surprised that the average answer about would you support low-carb, high-fat diets in these communities, or would you support EPSA programs in these communities? I'll say almost all of the health practitioners were saying that they were confused about nutrition. They were aware that they had a lack of nutritional knowledge. So because of that, they said that basically they would support someone doing a low-carb, high-fat diet, but they wouldn't advocate for it. So actually, I know that Hasina and Jane did a talk about Nutrition Network, and it's funny to think that basically both EPSA and Nutrition Network are so connected because there's a huge need to educate health practitioners, not only in these communities, everywhere, but this is this is a challenge that we found, and actually it makes sense. So this is more or less a summary of the whole project that we've been doing with EPSA. And I think I'm going to hand it to Hasina to talk about the medical aspects of the intervention.
Thanks so much, Georgina. So from the medical perspective, I've obviously done my training through the entire Cape Metropole in public healthcare. And the challenges that the public healthcare system faces in this country under the banner of still coming out of apartheid, where economic challenges and there are lots of other social challenges, is the trauma epidemic, the HIV epidemic, and then we also have obviously the obesity epidemic and the illnesses related to obesity. And so we find that because our healthcare system, like many healthcare systems all over the world, is overrun with these types of patients, that there isn't really much time in clinics for doctors seeing patients with chronic comorbidities to have this type of conversation. And so we have a population of people who seem to be resigned, in my experience, very much so, to this fate and an expectation that they will develop diabetes, they will have the heart attack. And it's an unspoken thing. When you spend some time digging below the surface as a clinician, obviously the fears come out, but there aren't really many doctors who take the time, maybe because they don't have time, and maybe, of course, because they don't have the nutritional knowledge, and also because doctors are resigned to this. And up until now, a few years ago, not many doctors actually saw a way out. And so this cycle is just perpetuated, just the vicious cycle. And so we have this resigned community facing a hopelessness with a loss of power, because the appointments are so quick and you can barely get your script for your new medicine. We call it the lucky packet, because it's a packet of pills that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so what we've changed things completely with Eat Better South Africa, because now we're building trust through conversation and we're empowering through education. And so from the medical perspective, it's very important to be able to oversee. You have no idea who's going to join the intervention, and we need to obviously vet the people who are coming in. We need to make sure that whoever's there, we fill in any past medical history. We don't allow anyone in who is in some sort of active illness, newly diagnosed thyroid or cancer or something like that. But other than that, people with stable chronic medical conditions are allowed into our intervention. We do a battery of blood tests. We do biometric markers. And, it's actually shocking, our last intervention, how abnormal some of the readings were. We were a bit flummoxed because we hadn't had that sort of abnormality in the readings previously, and we weren't sure whether it was the popularity of the Eat Better South Africa program, whether people were now happier to join us. They had a little bit more hope to lose weight because they were encouraged by people in their communities who were the very first people who had done the Eat Better South Africa program. And the job of the doctor is then to review all of these patients. You might find somebody with for the first time, abnormal kidney function, and they've never heard this before. And we would have to, of course, the diabetics who are coming on the program early, especially if they're on insulin, they need to be monitored very closely, advised, and they're seen on a more regular basis. So the role of the doctor, obviously running, any doctor who would run an Eat Better South Africa program or an intervention such as this, would be to have some training with regards to the chemical processes that change when you implement a low carbohydrate diet, and how to manage the blood pressure, how quickly to watch for changes, how to advise your patient, because we see changes immediately in blood sugar readings in the first day. So we have to make sure the patient has enough strips to monitor their glucose. This is a challenge in South Africa because not every, believe it or not every diabetic patient on insulin actually has a glucometer. And because of the cost of strips, sometimes some of the clinics run out of strips, and some of these patients get little stickers saying, I owe you. And so they may not even have strips to check their sugar readings, in which case we come in and buy them those machines with strips or whatever it is and provide it to the community. And we have a nursing sister who's available to do readings and check-ins as well. We have a WhatsApp group where the patients are constantly in contact. So it's a mixed bag. It's always wonderful, even though it's completely expected to see those metabolic markers and inflammatory markers improve. It's still always a wow. It's still always wonderful to be able to see how quickly these things change, how quickly we can start getting people off their blood pressure medication, make medication reductions, de-prescribe medication, something that I was never taught in medical school. And then obviously these patients get followed up long term, but our ultimate aim and what we were working on pre the pandemic was getting this particular community that was studied trained up through the Nutrition Network program. We had met with the superintendent of the hospital. We were planning to study the staff first in order to empower the staff, teach the staff in the public hospital system that these patients in the Eat Better South Africa program from Ocean View refer to. But unfortunately, we had to halt that as soon as the lockdown started, but that's definitely in the pipelines, and we can't wait for that to happen as soon as all of this is sorted out. So I'll hand over to Jana.
So I just quickly wanted to chat a little bit about COVID-19 and the effect of the pandemic on our Eat Better South Africa programs. So in South Africa, we went into lockdown around the end of March, which meant all of our physical group meetings with the Eat Better South Africa groups had to stop. One of the key factors that we found for the success of the participants is our WhatsApp groups or our support groups, which helps with sustainability and it offers the continued support to all the participants. So the COVID influence not only influenced the frequency of the group meetings, but it also had quite a bit of an influence on both the physical and the psychological ability or the state of the participants to continue to follow a low-carb lifestyle. So some of the things that was already a bit of an obstacle to start with was worsened when the whole of South Africa went into lockdown. And that included things like job security and unemployment rates, which had major financial implications for these participants. This in turn had an implication on food security. In South Africa, we had major cases of panic buying. So there were times where certain foods were just not available on the shelves to the participants. Even now, often we hear how the participants would talk about certain products that's not readily available to them, as it were, before the pandemic. So all of these implications are quite far-reaching. It also causes additional stress and family pressures, and as well as responsibilities in terms of what's expected of you within the family dynamic. Mental health is quite a big concern, as a lot of the participants feel very guilty for not being able to continue with the healthy lifestyle. So the main focus of our programs is to empower through nutritional education. So a lot of the participants know now, for example, that certain foods are unhealthy, but because things has changed so much, it's not always possible for them to eat healthy 100% all of the time. Especially some of the participants that did so well since the program started last year, they experienced quite a sense of a loss of control. So all of this now we had to think a bit about how we're going to approach this, because as we all know, the pandemic is not going to go away soon. So we have now started to look more, how can we offer support virtually? And this is where our WhatsApp groups came into play quite intense or quite important. We are looking at how we can take things online, but again, there are quite a couple of things we need to consider. Things like, does all our participants have access to smartphones? Do they have access to data? So those are all the new things we need to take into consideration, as well as who are they going to for their medical consultations, which clinics are they going to? And this again ties into what Georgina and Dr. Sina mentioned about how we want to start working more intensely with all the medical facilities around these communities.
In the video that we showed, Chris talked about, I think it was Chris, talked about all the effort to get it ethically approved. What was that about? What was required, and what did you guys have to do?
So I think it was Jamie. Jamie is one of my
Jamie,
supervisors.
that's right, yeah.
So it took us 7 months to get the pilot study, so the evaluation of the Ocean View program to be approved. 7 months, yeah. Took
7
us
months.
a long time.
Okay, but what does it involve, and what did you have to? Yeah. So what does it? What does it mean? What does it involve? And what did you actually have to do to get it done? I'm wondering, Tony can maybe chime in after this and tell us whether that's something that we might need to do here too.
Yeah, so basically every study that you want to do, it has to be approved by the university, and there's an ethics committee that reviews the proposals and then accept it or approve it or not. The main concerns that they had was basically the concerns that you can find everywhere. So we have concerns about specifics about the diet. Either it was the dietary fats, cholesterol, all of these things that we had to like fight for it and basically say that it was safe to promote low carb, high fat diets. And also we have other aspects regarding the fact that we were doing a nutrition education program in communities where there's lack of resources. And these are under-resourced communities, so these are considered vulnerable populations. So it's always like quite difficult to get ethics for these kind of things. But yeah, it was a challenge. And I mean, it took us 7 months because every time that we were submitting again the proposal, it took around 1 to 2 months to get an answer. So that's why it was back and forward all the time. Yeah.
Okay.
I think
so Tony,
my perspective, yeah. I mean, I don't think that we will have the exact same challenges, and I think it's health system dependent. And, you know, my health system allows us to be fairly independent in terms of how we kind of navigate. And we're also kind of in this moment when we just merged. So Advocate in Illinois in the States and Wisconsin in the States merged. So it's Advocate Aurora Healthcare. With the merger, one of the things they want to do is more research. So I think from the perspective of being able to do it, it'll be a little less of a barrier. And we do have a research team that could help support a doctor like myself who doesn't do research there. I've done research before, but so part of it would be to make sure that when research is done, that it answers questions that need to be answered. So that's where I could probably ask my colleagues to chime in. But the other part is to get buy-in, and I think the research will help with the buy-in. So we want to kind of teach our docs and our advanced practice nurses and other clinicians, you know, what's the return on investment? And if we can model something that'll give them a little bit meat on the bone, although we already have a lot of meat on the bone already, there's enough science to say that this is okay already. In fact, I just did a podcast with Dr. Feynman, Richard Feynman, and the science is there. So we just need to say, if you're going to help your patients and achieve the measures that we're defined by measures that deal with quality of care. And you'll achieve all of those measures while helping with metabolic disease, which will, help with all of these medical conditions. But if we have a study and we do both together, I think that there's an opportunity. So I think it'd be a little bit easier. But I think for me personally, as I think about this, where should I focus? Where are there gaps in our current research? Where do we need, Dr. Eric Westman's research? What do I need to add to his research versus the research that's being done in your country? So that's kind of how I'm seeing it. But it's really about just that return on investment. And I think when I started doing this type of work, I moved the needle for the first time. And I hadn't moved the needle, hadn't taken people off medicines much at all prior to doing a low carb, high fat diet. I really hadn't taken anybody off of insulin. So to then go from that to where I'm at now, where it's almost every week, it's actually pretty remarkable. So I think they need to hear those stories as well. They need to hear those stories because they're probably not hearing those stories. We live in little pods of, we're having success here and there, and we're not necessarily, those stories are not being heard. And all clinicians want to walk into a room and share a success moment with their patient. They don't want to walk in a room and add more medicine, but they don't know that there's another way. And so in the United States, there's only a little bit over 3,000 board certified physicians in obesity medicine. And I mention them because they get it. And yet we have 1 million doctors, and yet we only have 3,000. So there's some gaps in knowledge that I think that LowCarbUSA and Berta Health and Diet Doctor, all of these resources that are not being utilized will then have a way to educate our clinicians. And we just have to partner with them and go beyond that. We have to go directly to the patients too. And I think part of our journey is to reach the patients directly.
I'm kind of thinking, from my understanding, is that not so much patients, but the public, the people. I mean, when you went into those communities, it was literally the folks in the communities. You didn't. Did you solicit the help of the local doctors and that kind of thing, or did you just provide global help for them?
So I'll take that question, Doug. So what we did was we found a way into each community that we went to. And in South Africa, that's very different depending on where you are. So it started for us by working with exercise groups that were funded by our state. And those were in town halls, church halls, civic centers. In some places, and this is a very common thing in South Africa, you have to find the influencer in a community, particularly if you're working in a township. You have to actually walk on the streets and get to know the people and figure out who the influencers are, who the community leaders are. And so that took us to all sorts of different places on the journey. Some of them were in exercise groups, some of them were in clinics, a couple were in one was in an old age home with a group of elderly patients and diabetics. Very variable. You have to be incredibly creative in your application of how to find the right groups. And it changes wherever you are.
Yeah, so Tony, I think what they did was that they identified, these are all like pilot projects, like proof of, what's it called?
Proof of concept.
Proof of concept. There we go. Yeah. So they, you're not going in and saying, okay, I want to change the entire community, but they found, and I think the thing is, it's a group. Like they all go to the same church, or they all work out at the same place. So that's identify that group, and then provide the resources and the support for that group to change. And like you say, get the influencers within that group and that community to convince them that they should play the game, and then you see that you have the results afterwards, and you see everyone jumping up and down and going crazy, and then you take that to the rest of the communities and say, see. We did it with this little group. You guys as a community can do this too. I think that's
I like it. I what I like about it is I know in the African American community it's the church for sure. Like I think of all groups in the in the United States, the most religious group, believe it or not, is the African American group in terms of their loyalty. So if we then identify, and it doesn't have to be that, but if we identify that as a good group to focus on, and the churches are pretty big. And whenever we have our healthy living events where we get in front of people, and it, typically it's 100 to 200 people, but if we engage one of the churches, it'll go from that number to 300 to 400 people in one group. You're in front of them and you're teaching them, and of course that'll evolve with the virtual situation we're in now. But yeah, and then the question is, for a Latin American population, does that influence or look different? So as you think about different groups, it may be different, but I do agree that we may want to run to that methodology, because with social media and word of mouth, you may actually, you may reach more people faster, because people really want to be healthy. They just don't necessarily, they've been given mixed messages and the wrong information, a combination of both. So they don't know what to believe. Is meat good or is it bad? Can I be a carnivore? Do I need to be a vegetarian? All of these mixed messages confuses people. So if we have a way to get to them directly, share success stories, they create their own community within those communities. They will certainly, when we do our virtual meetings, we have a COPD program. They have a high attendance rate. They also, and it's modeled after the diabetes prevention program, but it's all lifestyle. And they basically make our jobs easy. We provide information and they kind of support each other. So, but if we have to wait for the systems to do it, and I'm going to do that as well. I'm a medical director. I'm going to do that as well. But if we just wait, then we're going to run into trouble, because until we change guidelines that reflect this model at least equally, we're going to struggle, because the docs, they're evidence-based people who, if they don't follow the guidelines, they feel they're being a bad doctor. Then they have to speak to the leadership. And I've talked to people in our space who are struggling to stay with, they have to leave their system just to do this work. So we need to do multiple things at the same time, but I think going straight to the people is probably a good idea.
So if I could just come in there, Tony. So just one thing first was, the book, there's a book called Changing for Good by James Oprochaska. And he describes various groups of people, the pre-contemplators, the contemplators, and then action. And obviously these groups that we went into, there were predominantly groups that were already taking action. But there were also people who were introduced to the group who really weren't that keen. Who someone said, join me, I'm going to this group. So they were overweight. Some of them were on insulin for over like 20 years. I think Uncle Percy is over like 60 years, and he talks about joining this group. And he just, in that first session of nutrition education, the sugar demo, where people realize how much sugar they're eating, had already decided that he's doing this. And funny enough, those pre-contemplators, they became our biggest losers in the 6-week program, which is not often that you'd get somebody who hasn't even contemplated taking the step. And then the second thing that I think might help you is an angle that we used getting into the hospital community is this. If you have established that there is a patient population who wants to practice, who wants to take on this lifestyle and wants to live low carbohydrate lifestyle, and you don't have doctors to look after these patients, are your doctors not obliged to learn about the science of a low carbohydrate diet in order to support a group who voluntarily chooses this way of life because they can see the difference that it makes in their lives. And so this is the question we posed to the superintendent and the doctors of the Ocean View community to say, we understand you need to follow guidelines. We understand that you feel uncomfortable going against those guidelines. We would propose doing a study on the nursing staff. And it would be, obviously with their permission and and insight, we would give them all the information beforehand, and we would do the markers before and after so that you can see how it works. And at the same time, we would be educating them by their, but through experience. And also educating them because they need to be able to know what their population group who's coming to them is doing, and how to be able to manage their blood pressure and sugar and all of these things on a low carbohydrate diet. So that is an angle that might be helpful to you too.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Thank you. I mean, that's not to cut you off, Doug, but that's perfect, because my angle was metabolic disease, and it's going to touch on all of these areas, and and I like metabolic disease because it covers, like, it's less, it's not like keto, right? So it doesn't sound as dramatic. We're going to just treat metabolic disease. And I know that LowCarbUSA has clinical guidelines. I've talked to Adele Hyde about, the diet doctor, and they're just having guidelines in place too. But I like that angle because it's an obligation. We're working on a weight management program. It would have been done by now if it wasn't for COVID. And I'm glad in a way that it didn't happen, because, you have all of these nuances you need that time to think about. And we do have an obligation. So, and we want to support really vegetarianism. We want a Mediterranean, DASH diets. We want to really have people who can support all of those approaches, while having, we just have to be honest about what really moves the needle as well. So we actually have a meeting in a couple of weeks in this area, and I'll definitely bring that to the table.
Yeah,
and I'll check out that book too.
Someone just reminded me that talking about churches and influences and stuff, Brian Lenskes kind of got converted effectively at our 2017 event, and reached out to me later in the year, was astounded, had taken 11 patients off insulin over the last few months and everything. And he was like, he wanted to do, like, as with all of us, once we get the experience, you want to like pass it on, and what could he do? And he ended up putting on a thing at his church, and he's quite a respected kind of person in the church, and he got the pastor was also very interested in this, and so he told the whole congregation, and he ran it on a Sunday morning, and then for people that wanted to rather go to church, who didn't want to come to this, he repeated it again on the Monday night, and it was like for 6 weeks, and there was about 200 people at each different session, and they all pitched up for like pretty much all of them. There was just almost, I'd say, without counting exactly, it looked like the same number of people on the sixth week as in the beginning. That's powerful, because that's the strength of the community that you don't find elsewhere. And Tony, I would say that there's chances that in the kind of churches that you're talking about, there may be even more of a strong community and sense of loyalty. So
we would have the capacity, considering we're being forced to be virtual now. Whenever I speak or am asked to speak virtually to a church, they always have good attendance. And so if we had a way working in partnership where, okay, our goal is to get out and touch as many lives as possible, we could probably touch a lot of people fairly quickly. Just trying to, being thoughtful about, okay, once we put ourselves in front of people, then what? I think just maybe have thought put into what's the next step? How do we make sure that we're moving the needle? So I think that type of model is getting in front of the camera like we're doing. By the way, thanks for the suggestion of a webcam. I just did that because of your advice, Doug, and I can see the difference. So thank you for that. But with this technology, you can get in front of a ton of people, make a difference. It doesn't really impact your life, you already know the information. It's just coming up with a process, and then reaching. I already have some tentacles in the churches in terms of people I know, and growing from there would be tremendous. It just should be offered to people as an option.
Yeah, hallelujah. But that's what we're trying to do, right? It gets offered to everyone as an option. Once that's done,
and I think that's a really important. That's something that we've learned over the years that's really important, is that not everyone that does these programs needs to become a patient and necessarily ever needs to see a doctor. So we take bloods pre and post our interventions, and usually a maximum of 10% of those guys have issues and need to go and see the doctor, be treated, watch their medication. Everyone else is doing those programs because they have health issues that are, they may want to lose weight. Often in underserved communities, people don't want to lose weight in South Africa. They actually want to improve their skin, and weight loss isn't their objective. So for us, it's been a big journey in just allowing community care. So someone does a program, and then 3 years later, you see their husband's lost 50 kilograms, and they actually feed, the average woman in South Africa feeds up to 11 people. So there's a massive ripple effect of just sharing the knowledge without it being a formal patient relationship necessarily.
Well, I was just thinking, so the social determinants of health that you guys are facing seem at times when you talk about it way crazier than what we're dealing with. But I think that there's pockets of that here as well. And I just think that if there's a way, and we've learned even with our healthy living program, there's definitely a way to get to the right diet, even with a limited budget. We sometimes have to go into the grocery stores. The biggest barriers we face are the women's and children's programs, and the lunch programs. All of those types of guidelines-based programs are not going to have the type of nutrition we need. So I think that's a little bit of a barrier. But for the most part, I think part of that messaging when we're in front of people is, how do we do this affordably? That way we can reach everybody. So if you guys could pull it off in that environment you guys have described, then I know we can as well. But we have to address social determinants of health, not necessarily in a nutrition program, but we need to speak to it in a way that's respectful, recognizing that there are other barriers that people face. And if they at least hear we're talking about it, they'll understand that we get it. We're not blaming you. We're not demonizing you. We get it. And by the way, your doctor may not know this stuff because they weren't taught that. So don't demonize your doctor. They just haven't been taught that. So I think we have to think about a lot of things, how we message it. But people are very interested in being healthy. They just don't know how to get there.
Yeah. So it kind of only just occurred to me, I don't know, this morning, maybe yesterday, for the first time, was when I was trying to get my head around what was going to happen here at lunch, was that was a perfect opportunity to create a third committee under the SMHP to address this. And we'll get you involved. Obviously, you'll probably end up heading up that committee. And I was hoping to get him on here as well. I don't know if any of you saw the talk by Gurpreet Pada, but earlier on in the weekend. But he's done astounding work as well. Works also with the really poor communities, and provides a ton of information and help and support for nothing. And I mean, I think he's got 50 or 60,000 people on his program now. And he's a quiet, unassuming guy that came and attended a couple of events. And I got talking to him one time and ended up getting him on a podcast. And it was in that podcast interview that I learned for the first time this amazing job. I mean, I think I even said to him something like, I think I should just quit this because you're like doing 1,000,000 times more good than I've been able to do. He's obviously going to be a lot of help in this as well because he's already reaching those people. So we can just hopefully help for him to reach even more.
Yeah, well, I think it's passion. So I think as I just shared with my son, as he watched me doing my podcast, he said, Dad, I want to do a podcast, right? And so I said, well, why don't you come up with some thoughts of what you want it to look like? And, 3 days later, he had written his first podcast episode. So I think we just have to act. We have these thoughts in our heads, and as long as we work together to act on it and just get the ball, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get that train moving. I think we'll be fine because I think that it just makes sense. And people are pretty much, it's easy to engage people right now. This is what people are doing. I have 70 and 80-year-olds that I'll be doing video visits with on Tuesday, and they're figuring it out. So we can reach a lot of people right now.
Yeah. Hopefully, you could try and teach my mom then.
That's right. My medical assistant, she's the expert.
Yeah. I think I'm kind of excited about this. I think it's great that we're going to be able to. We have a place now where we can actually form this committee, and it's going to be a home for it. And then we can, once we start talking more about it later in the year, we need to circle back with the folks here at Eat Better South Africa and see what we can learn from them in terms of, basically don't make the same mistakes. Like learn from all the pitfalls and mistakes that you made. Hopefully we can learn from that and yes, we'll make our own mistakes, but we at least won't have to go through all your dramas first. We can learn from you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we've done is we've found very, very creative ways to perfect and get this program to work. And we've built a 6-week program that changes lives and works for people.
Yeah,
and it's very, very duplicatable into new communities and different cultures. So we would love to share that with you in any way that we can. The more people that can do this and learn this, the more we're going to change the world this way.
I think so.
Really start at home, churches and in exercise groups, and it doesn't start in the hospital. It starts in churches, sports centers, home. That's where this really has to be.
Yeah.
And Doug, you said you'll make your own mistakes. It's like that perfectly planned wedding where things go wrong. And no matter how much you plan, something's going to go wrong.
Of course.
And you just have to kind of roll with it. And, with us, we've learned so much that it's brought us to this point during the pandemic because many of our communities are riddled with drug-related violence. And the ladies here, Yana and Georgina, will tell you that they've come face to face with that, where people are murdered literally outside where the intervention is being held. So many times we haven't been able to go into the community because it's just not safe. So it's brought us to a point where we've had to embrace technology, but obviously then the challenge is that do the participants have smartphones? Do they have data? The information that we're giving, is it going to eat up all their data? How do we get to them? So it's a unique challenge, and whichever community you go to, you're going to face new challenges and new ways of working together.
Yeah, you say that thing about the drama outside, murder going on outside and stuff like that. So you can tell I've been away from there for a long time because
that's right.
That freaks me out now. Whereas it's like you kind of you just accept it, if you live there. But that's kind of scary. But yes, thank you all. Sorry.
This is a good discussion, Doug, because we talk about bio-individuality. And I think that even in our health system, as we've tried to improve upon it, I can look at other health systems and assume we can just take their model and just drop it into ours. It just doesn't work that way. Every clinic is different. Every, just all the barriers to achieving the same goal. So it's actually better to walk into this expecting that there are going to be things that we have to do differently. And that's a better model. And then we improve upon that. And then we expect that we're going to have to improve upon that. That way we're not disappointed when things don't go smoothly the first time around. We expect it not to go smoothly. We're just going to try to optimize our starting point. So I think it just frames us in a way that the patients are not disappointed, the docs are not disappointed, but our ideal state, we're just going to keep marching towards. And I think that's why this is totally okay. Hopefully not with the gunshots outside the meeting, but I tell you, that's the reality. And just like you, Doug, I don't remember those days. I grew up in a tough neighborhood, but the only fights I have now are with the squirrels. I fight with the squirrel. It's my deck, not the squirrel's deck. But I don't have to dodge bullets and things like that. So.
Yeah. It's been great. I think this is it's food for thought for everybody, I think. And even though we're going to do this, hopefully the people that are listening now and the people that listen to this later, hopefully this inspires them to go and try and do something in their own communities as well. And I encourage them to reach out to you if they want any advice or help or whatever as well. Eat Better South Africa. Jana, can you send me that URL to that page that you made up?
Yes.
Because I've got so much going on here, I can't find it. But I want to be able to post that and let people, for those of you that are listening and will listen, what they're doing there is incredible, and it takes money. And so if any of you are able to maybe help contribute there, a few dollars goes a long way in South Africa. So if anybody's go to that thing that we'll post, the site that we'll post, and if it tugs at your heartstrings, then pitch in a few bucks for them to keep doing this awesome work. Okay.
Thanks so much, Doug.
All right, I think we'll call it a day then. Thank you.
I appreciate seeing you guys. I did some of the Noakes Foundation training, so it's nice to meet my teachers.
It's very nice to meet you, Tony.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.